Chairman, you still want me to keep us going?
Please, I lost track of who's up next, so that'd be great. Thank you.
I made it complicated just to seize power. Um, okay. Um, so we anything before we go on the record? Okay.
Nothing from us, Commissioner Gilman.
Okay, perfect. We are back on the record in proceeding 21A-0141E, the near-term procurement. And I just want to check in quickly to see if there are any preliminary matters before we restart our confidential session. Yeah, Mr. Dusky.
Good morning, Commissioner Gilman. I was just emailing with commission staff and council, Mr. Larson, about putting up a demonstrative exhibit during my highly confidential questioning of the panel. It was not completely filled in yet because it was a question we asked the company on Tuesday. And so I thought I'd bring it up now since it's a preliminary matter.
So if I got it right, you want to pull up a demonstrative while you're doing your highly confidential questioning?
Yes.
Okay. And since we're not entering evidence, you're fine with that. I suppose you could attach it to your comments if that's something you'd like to do.
Correct. Thank you. That's correct.
Ms. Mabaka?
Commissioner, I was going to ask if you're going to ask if the company has any objections to that. I think that the process that you've suggested is correct, and I was just going to point that there's no box.com process. So I appreciate that clarity for our administrative assistants. And again, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Larson, any thoughts on viewing a demonstrative from Mr. Detsky during that questioning?
I got no issues putting the demonstrative up. I do have I've received a copy of it this morning. It's like a blank table. I just want to be transparent that we're not going to be able to complete that table in real time while the demonstrative's up on the screen.
My response is that this is a question that you indicated the company could answer. So whether or not how we fill it in is something I'm willing to work with the company on.
Yeah, why don't we work offline to fill out I can point you to where the details are as opposed to doing it in a live hearing.
That would be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah, if y'all can chat in the interim, that would be great. And then let's try to work out once we're in the confidential session where we can get and hopefully have some agreement between the two of you on when this all takes place.
Thank you.
Yep, no worries. Anything else before we go into confidential session?
Nothing further from us, Commissioner.
Okay, and I will just note our current estimate is around an hour of confidential questioning to close that out. So I believe we've notified our participants who are not part of the confidential session to rejoin around 10 o'clock.
Yeah, our team sent out a communication to the service list following on our discussion towards the end of the day yesterday.
Excellent. Great. Well, I know of no changes, so to me, that's still the plan.
Great.
Okay. Well, with that, I'll ask, sorry, I'm not sure who we have helping us today, although I should know that.
It's funny.
Okay, Ms. Kunkel, to move us into highly confidential session. Mr. Larson, I'll ask you, once we get there, if you can pretty briefly just check the list for me before we get started.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to start that process now.
Okay,
Perfect.
this should just take a few minutes if folks will stand by. If you know you're not part of the highly session, please Okay, welcome back to the public session. We've concluded the highly confidential session. Just want to see, and apologies to those who are waiting for us. Sorry, we were We were going so fast yesterday. I got optimistic this morning. But we're planning to resume public questioning first with Mr. Detsky, and then I plan on going to the commission. That was what I understood would happen next, but just wanted to make sure no parties have any other thoughts or ideas or pressing concerns with that plan.
No, that sounds like the next last two steps here from our perspective.
Phase, tier, step, I never know. Keep us on our toes in your
Yeah.
filing about what we call
We
these,
do, yeah.
these things. I
A
like
lot
it.
of nomenclature.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so then with that, we are back for CIA. Mr. Detsky, you've got, I believe, 15 minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner Gilman. These questions are just limited to transmission yesterday, and so I don't know if the transmission member is on the meeting or if Mr. Langell will take these, but I wanted to start off by talking about the open access transmission tariff. The report says that talks about TPIF. We talked about this yesterday. And those, it says, are paid for by the bidder. And I want to clarify, because my understanding is that open access transmission tariffs have something called interconnection customer interconnection facilities, or ICIF. And those are costs that are paid by the bidder up to the point where it hits a transformer. And transmission and TPIF are funded in some cases by the bidder, but are paid for, reimbursed by the utility. And I want to make sure that that is how PSCO understands it.
Yeah, a little bit beyond my depth of knowledge of the OAT. Mr. Pascucci.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's consistent, Mr. Detsky, with the way you're talking about it, of my understanding of the OAT as well, is that you've got that, I think, as you said, the bidder is responsible for getting up to the point of interconnection. Then there are those kind of TPIF that the bidder kind of funds them up front, but is reimbursed for them. And then there are those further upstream that are the PSCO funded ones.
Great. So the TPIF is what I would commonly refer to as network upgrades. And so that leaves this concept of POPF, which I do not think is in the FERC tariff and is applicable to bidders generally.
So I don't believe the POPF term is, and Mr. We should probably introduce him. So Mr. Roy Chowdhury, if you're out there, I thought I saw you where you may want to pop on camera, but we have Raj here available for kind of some of the technical questions. I think this one, and of course he can jump in anytime. I'm not sure, at least, or don't recall seeing the POPF specifically listed in there. I can double check, Mr. Detsky. It's a long OAT tariff with lots of pages, and I'm not going to pretend to have memorized every one, but I don't believe that it's specifically defined in there. I think if I understood your question correctly, we're not assigning that as a cost that the bidder is required to pay for. The PSCO owned, PSCO funded is not a cost that the bidder pays. It's not a cost that we're passing on to them. But probably a good thing for Mr. Landrum to confirm that I'm stating correctly is it's still a cost to customers that is incurred. And so we are factoring that into the pricing analysis to understand a more holistic cost to the customer of each bid.
Great. So that is also my understanding. And I just wanted to, I think that distinction is important for this exercise because when you're looking at attachment A, and we talked about that yesterday, you have all these costs listed under POPF, and there are these benchmark costs. But yesterday, I think Mr. D'Agostino said it doesn't include TPIF. That's a separate thing in attachment A. None of those bidders will pay those POPF costs. And as I just did, we talked about this in confidential session. I'm not going to bring that here to any confidential degree, but just to state, like, when you're doing something like building a new switching station, accommodating multiple bids, what you're doing is you're lowering costs to ratepayers by taking advantage of what upgrades PSCo builds on its system. But they're all PSCo upgrades. They're all things that Excel is going to eventually need to bring forward in CPCNs or in 3206. They're transmission funding that's needed to grow the system. Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's, there's incremental transmission costs to connect these bids. I must admit, I'm not really sure where you're going. I mean, we were looking at the costs that we included in Appendix A. We have all in, which includes those non-direct generator costs that will still be borne by our customers. And then we have as bid, which is really the costs that are directly attributable to that specific generator. That does include the TPIF, which the bidder was going to have to put up funding for, or at least security for. And there's a cost of doing that on the bidder side, and we would expect that cost would be recovered through their PPA offer price.
Where I'm going with this is that I think it's important for the commission parties to understand that all of these costs are going to end up being paid for by ratepayers, right? Through the PPA or the ownership. That's not what necessarily the issue. The issue is when we're talking about what kind of transmission is needed to be built on the system, and the overall cost of that and why that cost is necessary. And so I think that's very important when we're talking about the level of transmission investment that's a concern for the commission, and where that's coming from, and how that is being brought forward in this report. From CIA's perspective, it's important to show that there are some costs that are just system costs that need to be accounted for, especially when you have a system that isn't ready to handle all this. And that's why I wanted to go for my last set of questioning is just on this DC transfer limit study. We talked about it a bit yesterday, but I wanted to revisit it with your transmission expert. Because what I understand from our conversation yesterday is the DC transfer limit study took the whole system as it exists today and said, okay, I look at section 4.5, it says options evaluated. So you took a 2030 look at the system. That means it has the CPP and it has the Denver Metro system. Then you scale down. This is just before you even get to these projects. You scale down the solar to 65% and wind down to 40%. And then you run the power flow model, right? And that's what the first option is, correct? Okay.
Right, it's correct. And it's again DC power flows, it's linear power flow. It's not AC. So that's the only distinction I'll make.
Thank you. And distinction that I understood that distinction yesterday to mean that, like, you're not looking at anything other than electrons falling on the main system.
So voltage is not taken into consideration when you run a linear power flow or a DC power flow. Yep.
Okay. So then you go down the second part of 4.5, and this is the scenario you ran where now you put all the NTP generation in it, about 5 gigawatts. And then it says, by my reading, it says you turned off or scaled down the existing thermal and renewable generation. Does that mean you turned it off, or does that mean you took these dispatches down to 0, or how does that work?
So at the end of the day, you have to balance the case, right? So
Yes.
whatever was needed to make that load to generation balance, right? That was either ramped down or sometimes turned up. So I don't have the exact dispatch in front of me, but that is exactly what was done.
Okay, so you turn these things down until the case solves.
Yep.
Which means that there is transmission in this study. And so usually when that kind of study happens, you don't look at the whole transmission system, right? You'll take a piece of it, and because otherwise you get crazy, issues on the other side of the state, for example, you know, that don't necessarily impact what you're studying. Does that ring a bell?
I'm not sure if that is accurate, actually. We do study the entire system.
Okay. So you're studying the entire system and you're backing down the generation. And then in a normal case, what you would do from then is you would take elements out of service, right? You would do like an N-1. So like the two scenarios that you run are both like system intact, ideal conditions.
Not sure with that. I need to take a look.
Okay.
But I believe this is what you call as a flow gate analysis, so FCITC, so force contingency incremental transfer analysis. So it does take into account N-1. But this is again a linear N-1, not a AC N-1. Yeah.
Okay. So it just seems to me that what this DC transfer study is telling me is that if when you just look at the system as a high a level as you possibly can in these transmission analyses, in order to get 5,000 megawatts onto the system, you essentially have to back down a lot of the system as it exists today to get power to flow.
That's how, yeah, the studies that are done. Yep, that's correct.
Okay, so that tells me then that there's a real issue in interconnecting and delivering 5 gigawatts in 2029 without some significant upgrades.
Yeah, I mean that's what we've said and shown several times is that we're, you know, for completing the path to 2030 and adding the renewable generation that we need and doing the JTS and now the NTP, there is going to be a level of incremental transmission. Probably the best study so far that we have in the record would be the JTS Phase 1 transmission study, where we identified that $2 to $2.5 billion of incremental investment. We're working actively through the CCPG process and internally to look at the actual generators now that we have some identified and firm that analysis up and turn it into actual mitigations required and budgetary estimates for those, and we'll ultimately, you know, hopefully proceed through CPCN proceedings to make it actually happen. But I think the point I'm trying to make is agreeing with you that everything that we have seen and produced has shown that to add incremental generation, we're going to need to have incremental transmission. And everything seems to point generally consistently to that $2 to $2.5 billion level. And we've got active studies underway, both in the broader forum and internally, to turn that into actionable projects.
And the only part where I agree with all that, I think the DC transfer limit study shows a bit more concern than I even had before, based on the backing down and the what we just talked about. But I want to draw the distinction too. The 2.5, that's the Denver Metro flows. That's not talking about getting more renewable energy on the grid in eastern Colorado, for example, San Luis Valley. That's not it. That's not included in that 2.5.
I believe there was some San Luis Valley mitigations included in the 2.5, if I'm not mistaken. But not all of it was exclusively Denver Metro. I mean, certainly some of it was. But we also had, you know, voltage support on the CPP and other projects that aren't just directly Denver Metro constraint type projects.
And we support CIA. This CCPG study, it was looking at, you know, on a timeline to get things in service by 2030 and beyond. But we may need to bump that up if you have this tranche coming in 2029.
So we kind of alluded to this yesterday. I think to your point, Mr. Detsky, that's a lot of the intent at the CCPG study right now of integrating in what this NTP portfolio looks like now. This is rather than using generic assumptions about where resources might be based on, well, 5 years ago, this is what we thought we saw, so we'll assume that holds true now. We can take an actual portfolio of real bids, put them into the modeling that we're conducting at CCPG, and have a more accurate representation of essentially an acceleration of the JTS. So I think your point is aligned with exactly what's happening right now, which is that we know more generation is needed. We know we need more refinement into, or apologies, we know more transmission is needed to facilitate the incremental generation. We now have the ability to more accurately define what that is on a faster timeline than had we waited for the JTS phase 1 scenario or phase 2 scenario with the base RFP to fully play out and then update things. So we may identify more that's needed, and we may identify less that's needed. We may also identify opportunities to work with other utilities that are participating in the CCPG task force to find more efficient ways to address both deliverability and generation connection or kind of backbone transmission need that solves the problem more efficiently.
And that's my final point. Thank you. It's just that I want to make sure that the conversation is not only focused on the flows in and around Denver, but also the fact that you're going to have a full CPP, you're going to have very little interconnection capacity, if any, on the system for the JTS, which itself is going to require thousands of megawatts bid only next year. And that's the end of my questioning. Thank you.
Right on time, Mr. Detsky. Thanks. Appreciate it. All right. Plan is to go to commissioner questions now in the public realm. I think we're not very long from wrapping this up, but we'll note, I think we got a little conflict with the court reporter in the afternoon, which works fine if we're in public session. If for some reason there's a need to go back into confidential session, that's where we need to be more precise in that planning. And that would probably also tend me to wanting to just push through, even if it means a slightly later of lunch, if that's necessary. So just wanted to bring up those issues and see if that caused any issues. So it's really just the confidential session. If someone's anticipating we need another one, that we'd want to get done sooner than later. But otherwise, I think we're good to roll. So Commissioner Plant.
Thanks. I just have one clarifying question real quick. In the JTS report, some of the backup bids are identified as backups for specific projects. Maybe 3 or 4 of them are, and then the rest of them are just identified as backups. Do you generally have a project in mind that you're backing up for, or I mean, those ones that aren't specifically identified as associated with a specific project, are they associated with a project? It's just not identified, or are they generic sort of backup?
Yeah, they are generic. A process that we used in the 23 ERP CEP, where we try to do technology for technology, what we call like for like, and we try to replace a PPA with a PPA or an owned project with an owned project, also like for like. In general, all of the tier 2 projects are in that category where, depending on the type of bid that fails, we'll seek to replace it with as similar of a project as is available in the backup list. We did identify those 2 pairs. 2 of the tier 1 projects are paired with 2 of the tier 2 projects on a 1-to-1 basis, just due to, I don't want to refer too much to the highly confidential session because, folks didn't have a chance to hear that, but we discussed that there's those 2 projects. We did it in the report, the public version of the report as well, that there's a unique situation where we're going to try to get 2 new bids to reroute slightly to an existing planned substation that's very nearby where they wanted to connect to. That would require at least 3 different IPP counterparties and the company all managing to work out a plan to effectuate that, and on a timeline that can still capture the tax credits. We're committing to try, but we're also being honest that it's might be called a long shot. There's a lot of things that have to fall in place perfectly to make that actually work on the time that we need it to work by. So because the fact that there are so many moving pieces that have to work well for that to happen, we thought it was prudent and expedient to go ahead and pre-identify what we would do if it doesn't work out. And that was the case for those 2 backup bids and why they were singled out as a special case.
So, just to clarify, so should we think about those backup bids that are tied to a specific project as being specifically for that project, but the ones that aren't identified with a project are basically like for like? If there's a storage project that's selected, then really any storage project in the backup is a potential backup for that project. Is that the way we should think about it, except for the ones that are specifically identified? I think we maybe lost Mr. Landrum again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we did, but I think you're correct, Commissioner. Plan is if it was not designated specifically to one project, as this is the kind of handcuffed backup, maybe an example I might use is you may recall in the original CEP from a couple of years ago, we had the project that had some tribal concerns associated with it that had a designated backup. So in that case, it was kind of a handcuffed backup. The others are more generically, as the rest of the portfolio was in the CEP, available to fill in gaps wherever they may appear. And then we have, as we outlined, kind of that process you'd want to go by to address that. Does
Okay.
that make
Yeah.
answer your question?
That does answer my question. Thank you. That's
And apologies.
That's right.
Obviously having problems again today. I was going to say right before I got cut off there that I think you're totally right in your interpretation. The only caveat I would say is that, if this long shot does work out and we are able to connect the two-tier projects, then those designated backups would still be valid as being backing up as other bids. And they would be kind of like go back into the pool and have equal standing of any other backup bid. So it isn't that if they're exclusively tied to this project, they're the first in line. But if we manage to make this whole organized thing happen, then there's still going to be backup bids and we'll be eligible if a different bid fails.
Okay, great. Thank you for the clarification. Appreciate it. That's all I have.
Thanks. Just one comment and one question request. The comment is, in the confidential session, I asked for information that was competitively sensitive in ways I hadn't fully appreciated. After reaching out to Commission Counsel, I'm happy to put that request on hold for now, pending conversations with Counsel. So nothing further you need to do, Mr. Larson, on that one. Just one last question. After our conversation yesterday, and independent of the size and structure of the ultimate Tier 1 and Tier 2 pool, I continue to think that there may be some significant benefit to creating an option payment structure to safe harbor the Tier 2 projects for at least two reasons. First, it provides a backup if Tier 1 projects fail after July 2026, which seems certainly possible. And second, it provides a pool of safe harbor projects for the JTS solicitation. So I guess would the company be willing to provide us and the parties with its best shot at a proposed option payment structure in terms, along the lines of the incremental need pool to safe harbor the Tier 2 projects as best as reasonably possible, at least through the JTS bid process? So Mr. Landrum, would you be willing to do that?
Yeah, I'm subject to conferring with our team and counsel, of course. I will note that in our filing on Tuesday, we did offer a path forward that probably may not align exactly with the way the conversation has turned over the previous 2 days. So we'll certainly take a look at that and figure out the best path forward to do that. I will, just for informational purposes, I educated myself a little bit after our conversation yesterday, and what I'm hearing is in terms of MPT, main power transformer cost, a 500 megawatt wind farm as a hypothetical, probably $20 to $25 million would be a reasonable budget expectation for that MPT. So if that changes your view at all, or maybe just kind of put that into your reckoning as probably what the relative level of cost obligation would be for a 500 megawatt wind farm.
So more like 2% of the project costs.
Yeah.
And I get it. There's also issues of reserving equipment that could be far higher to actually hit the COD deadlines. but yeah, if you could put that forward, whether it influences the shape of the tier 1 or tier 2 pools is a different question. It seems like, I mean, would you agree that there's benefits to have backups that are safe harbored after July 2026? And would you agree that it would make for a better JTS process if we had safe harbored tier 2 projects? Do you
Yeah,
agree with that premise?
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Yeah, I 100% agree with you that having a robust and viable tier 2 pool is in the best interests of customers and the system reliability. I'm not commenting one way or the other. I think that the on the question of is an option payment necessary, required, helpful, to what extent in ensuring that that happens, I think is the conversation to be had. Not predisposing the outcome of that conversation one way or the other. But I think having a robust pool is unquestionably, we agree upon, the best method to effectuate that is what we can continue to discuss.
Fair enough. Mr. Larson, did you have any other comment?
No, sir. But before we wrap, I do have one question for, I guess, the technical conference. I have a question for you. Coming back to yesterday, I just want to clarify what was in, which bid numbers were in the construct that you discussed yesterday, but we could do that at the end.
All right. And I'll tie that down. That's all I had, Commissioner Gilman, and I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thanks. I have a few questions that I just skipped yesterday in the spirit of fairness, my colleagues. My first question, though, I just wanted to follow up on a question I had asked yesterday. So I had asked, and I know Mr. Bornhofen responded. I think it was really based on concerns around bid 134, but potentially other bids where if a bidder has proposed a condition, like either PPA terms or something that the company finds unacceptable, really trying to figure out if the company follows up with those bidders to understand if that was merely a suggestion or a take it or leave it kind of situation. And in response to that, Mr. Bornhofen indicated that in every case, every bidder is allowed an opportunity to cure. So there's a communication sent to every bidder indicating, you know, an issue and kind of looking for a feedback. But then I thought I had heard later that there really is no opportunity to individually communicate with each bidder about these issues. And so I want to just clarify that for my own understanding, because, you know, I'm trying to really understand what this communication flow looks like to bidders, so that if we are making decisions and you're making decisions on these key factors or things from the bidder, are these suggestions, are these terms they absolutely must have? So any clarity you can provide for me on what your process looks like. I was frankly pretty confused after yesterday.
Yeah, let me start, and Mr. Bornhofen can probably jump in here after me and clean up. These are negotiated contracts, and at least in the world that we're in right now, prior to finalizing the JTS, we're hoping, as we discussed extensively, to get more towards a conforming bid policy, at least closer to it, which will help some of this. But in the world that we live now and that we have lived in historically, it's frankly, everything is negotiable. We walk into negotiations with these bidders. We have initial conversations about where our starting point is and points of contention with what is in the model contract on both sides. And we go from there and we negotiate. And within every negotiation is expected that there'll be some back and forth, and you know, one party will give up something in exchange for something else, and vice versa. So how I would describe when bids come in the door with red lines is that we have, you know, typically our model contract is where we're starting from. This is where we think the negotiation should end up. The bidder red lines is their version of that. It's like where we're going to start at when we sit down to the negotiating table, where we think it should be. We're not going to be able to resolve that difference over the course of a bid evaluation period, not even a 4 or 6 month ERP phase 2. Much less a 60-day. I mean, that's what negotiations are for. They take months. They involve lawyers, you know, executive approvals, all that kind of stuff. So we're not going to do that during a bid evaluation process. What we can do is assess on a qualitative basis, how far apart are we? Are we really starting on opposite ends, that the bidder wants to be here, we want to be here? And John's team is part of the due diligence team, and they assess that and give us a sort of a qualitative score on likely outcomes of the negotiation process. If we're really close and it's a bidder that we have a very good working relationship with, no problem. If we're very far apart and it's a bidder that is typically contentious and we have a difficult working relationship for, that's probably going to be a problematic negotiation for us to get to a mutually agreeable conclusion. So that's what the due diligence process is assessing how far apart we are. We expect when a bidder submits red lines that that's their position. We don't really go back and ask them, are you sure that's your position? And we don't try to talk them off of that position necessarily, although we can tell them, and we have previously, that if it's just something that's just never going to happen. We've talked about walkaway rights. Those are a big one, that we contract with a party, we expect you to build the facility. We can tell bidders that, just FYI, this is never going to happen. Are you still want to stand by your bid knowing that we're never going to agree to this? And that's the kind of email communication that we might have in a bid evaluation process, to give a bidder fair warning that, something is so egregious and so out of normal business practices and frankly what the commission has approved or would accept, that they may want to rethink that position. And if they really are entrenched in that position, we don't want to waste a lot of time reviewing the bid. So that's a high level conversation. I'm not sure if John, if you want to clean up any of that or respond, or maybe I'll let you respond, Commissioner Gilman, if that worked for you or you have follow-up questions.
No, that's helpful to understand the process. Just curious, like in this particular bid evaluation, were any of those, did the company go back to any of these counterparties and say, this will be a non-starter?
Yeah, we did on a couple of occasions. One of them is bid 134 and let them know that they had some things in their red lines that were going to be, frankly, extremely problematic to resolve. I don't know, Anthony, do you remember the details of what they came back with? I think they just came back with something in the essence of noted, and we moved on.
And if I could just provide some clarity on bid 134 specifically, it wasn't about red lines. Their bid package stated that their pricing was not firm and it was subject to change in the future, and it was a baseline pricing only, and it was going to have to be, any additional costs were going to be shared by customers, et cetera. There's really no way to really model a project like that. You need to have some type of a firm baseline pricing to be able to model. So I heard red lines being mentioned. Yeah, red lines is part of the conversation, but negotiations, red lines, let's not get caught up there. It's really about whether or not the bid is actually a legitimate bid or not.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, just trying to understand in this whole universe, the ERPs, RFPs themselves, there's everything from red lines they provide to the completeness of their package to locations and permitting. And I mean, clearly, I think bidders hope to be successful. They put time and money into assembling their package. And so just trying to understand how well they understand how you're viewing these to ensure it's as fair and efficient a process as possible. I don't think they'd go to the trouble if they weren't trying at all. So just want to make sure they have as helpful of information as possible to make this whole process run smoothly.
I can give you just a quick example, Commissioner. I mean, real quick, the easy ones are a lot of developers ask us to adjust their performance requirements right off the bat, right in their bid package, right in their red lines. They say, hey, I'm going to strike X percentage and I'm going to put it down to X percentage. And that's a condition of my bid. But we don't necessarily want to reject that bid because they want a lower performance requirement. We'd rather have a conversation with them and try to resolve that and make sure that we can maintain the fairness and the integrity of the RFP, right? So we'll have a conversation with them, as Mr. Lander mentioned. We'll reach out to them via email and say, hey, your bid mentioned that you wanted to drop it from X percentage down to 70%. Are you aware that we've stated this and litigated this through JTS and CEP? We want to have firm performance requirements in all of our contracts. Are you aware and are you prepared to move forward? And we want to make sure that they understand that before they move forward. That's one example. There's a half a dozen other ones that are always brought up by all these bidders.
Yeah, and it is a somewhat ambiguous process under the current rules, and not to compete, beat this or relitigate it. That's one of the reasons why we're discussing in the JTS trying to tighten the guardrails so that everybody kind of knows what they're doing going in, and there's less of this ambiguity during the actual bid evaluation process. So, we're certainly moving in a productive direction, I think, that way. But this kind of conversations is really a lot of the justification for why we were making an issue in the JTS to try to resolve some of this gray area stuff.
And if I might add, just in the nature of like what information was provided to bidders, do they know what topics we might consider to be very important or that we're going to put our eyes on? That is in the RFP document. There's a list of topics within the model PPA contract that we have stated very clearly that we're going to take a heavy look at, and that they would materially impact reliability and resource adequacy, and or have added cost to the customer in general. So we have outlined those topics so that all bidders have seen that. And as Mr. Langer said, we did any bid that went through the due diligence process. Mr. Bornhoffen's team reviewed. They gave us some indications that they might want to reach out to the bidder to tell them specifically some areas of concern, and we did make those notifications.
Okay, thank you. I was just a little confused. That was helpful. I wanted to clarify what the company sees as the process moving forward. Is the company planning on submitting CPCNs for utility-owned generation that would be developed as a result of the NTP portfolio?
Yeah, absolutely. But Mike, you want to kind of cover the process where we see it going in the future?
Yeah, I think default assumption is that yes, the CPCN is probably the next step in it. I'll note in the filing made on Tuesday, one of the things that we recommended was either expediting or waiving that process. And the primary reason just being effectuating the tax credits and finding the smoothest path we can to that. As we've talked, we expect bidders to take on the risk of tax credits and, for the most part, price increases. What the company would hold itself to the same standard, and that if we bid a price, that's the price we're moving forward with. And I think we see a higher likelihood of being able to maintain bid price, especially for those projects which are not utility self-build, but are BOTs, if there is an accelerated path to avoiding a CPCN, which I think, as we all know, can sometimes take 10 to 12 months to do from filing. It would just help secure the tax credits and secure the pricing on those bids. But otherwise, the company is still intending that a CPCN of some sort is necessary.
Okay. So a couple questions about PIMs related to utility-owned projects, just so I can understand what information we already have and where we would be expecting to get the other relevant information. So in the NTP report, the company states that owned projects would be subject to the cost to construct, or the CTC, performance incentive mechanism, or PIM, and operational PIM and or an availability PIM based on the technology type. And I think the company's suggestion is that be aligned with how that was done in proceeding 24A-0141E. So first, on the cost to construct PIM, the cost to construct PIM approved in that proceeding begins with the point cost for the capital cost to construct the particular generation project included in the company's phase 2 bid, including all expected capitalizable costs necessary to bring the project to commercial operation, including the expected allowance for funds used during construction, AFUDC, anticipated project-related investment tax credits are subtracted from the baseline. And then aside from adjustments permitted under the CEP delivery decision, to adjust that baseline in a relevant CPCN proceeding, you'd have to demonstrate extraordinary circumstances. So I'm curious, especially related to the cost to construct PIM, when or how does the company plan to present information necessary to implement the cost to construct PIM, including the point cost for the capital cost to construct the AFUDC and any anticipated ITCs for each project.
So those costs should already be reflected in the bid packages and the revenue requirements for company-owned bids. So as part of the process, and John, Anthony, correct me if I'm wrong, but we ran revenue requirements, and we had all the information necessary to determine, what's the AFUDC expectation, what is the point cost capital estimate for it. So that information already exists, kind of in this NTP process, and the plan is to take that same number and in a regulatory filing, put it in there. Again, to the extent that it didn't change, and we have no anticipation right now of those numbers changing, the thought was in what we presented on Tuesday, it's unclear what else there is to really litigate. We would be applying the PIM. We have a methodology for that PIM. The numbers that go into that PIM are already there.
When you say already there, the company has them. No one else has them yet.
No, at least staff and UCA who have access to the bid packages would have access to that information as well.
Okay, the commission itself has not seen these numbers.
Correct, yes. I don't know that the big packages have been provided, for example, to you and the other commissioners as well, but staff and UCA would have them in those bid packages.
Okay, got it. So you would look to a CPCN proceeding to be providing those within the record?
Yes, I think that's probably where they would wind up being in the record in the full totality.
Okay. And then for the operational PIM, under the capacity factor operational PIM that was approved in the same proceeding, the baseline generation adjusted for weather is measured against actual generation, including curtailed production. And then the incentive disincentive is calculated by multiplying the deviation between the baseline and the actual generation by the LEC presented in the 120-day report from the ERP, and then applying the applicable sharing band. And the operational PIM will calculate the effective changes in generation on production tax credits, and the resulting deviation would be subject to the same sharing bands. So I'm curious, similar information here with regard to information that would be needed there, the assumed generation adjusted for weather that the company relied upon for the NTP bids for the utility-owned generation, and then if the operational PIM will use the LEC that's set forth in the NTP report for any of those projects.
So overall, everything you said, yes, the plan is that wind or solar project would be subject again to that same PIM with the same mechanisms that you discussed. We had generation forecasts are included in the bid packages. So staff, UCA have had access to those already. The intention is those stay the same. The one thing I would note on that one is the weatherization. You had noted that there is a weatherization adjustment per the terms of that settlement agreement. Staff, UCA, and the company need to work together to develop the methodology to do so. That process is still ongoing. We've been conferring and discussing on that. So just wanted to make clear the kind of process for that weather adjustment was still pending, and we still need to bring it back to the commission. But at this point would not directly impact any project as the PIMs haven't taken effect yet. But to your point, yes, the same projects, wind, solar, any utility-owned generation, we would transfer those numbers into the PIM. And the PIM has a process by which it is adjusted to incorporate new projects as well.
Okay. And is there any current kind of estimate or anticipation of when you anticipate concluding or having some outcome from those discussions on weather normalization for the data?
I'll pause just to make sure my attorneys or a staff or UCA attorney does not have a problem with me talking about this generically.
No concerns.
I see Mr. Larson saying no concerns and no one else telling me to please stop. So I expect we're going to need to ask for an extension. I think what we've talked about right now is about a 60-day extension. Originally, this was required to be done by the end of this year, but based on the conversations and challenges just with overall schedules and timing, I think we're looking to ask for about a 60-day extension to that.
And when would you anticipate, if there is utility-owned generation within the approved portfolio here, when would you anticipate those CPCNs being prepared?
So if I assume that the commission renders a decision in early February, ideally, we would look to get CPCNs filed in early Q2. Yet under a normal process, a normal CPCN process where we usually have about 2 witnesses, detailed attachments and work papers and things like that, it does take us about 6 to 8 weeks to put that together. And address everything we need to in there. So that's where I say sometime in Q2 is kind of the thought. If there was a more expedited process in which you could trim that down to less testimony or other representations that could be made, or there's some way to trim that, could accelerate that timeline slightly. But that's my anticipation right now, is based on what's in the proposed portfolio. We'd be looking to try and get as many of those filed in early Q2 as possible.
Yeah, and I will add that's contingent on working with the actual bidders.
Yeah.
All with the exception of 2 projects, I guess. There are a fair number of build and transfer projects that would require executing purchase and sale agreements, and as with any negotiation, you can never be 100% sure of how fast or slow that's going to go.
Yeah.
Okay, but it sounds like phasing wise, even considering a potential request for extension of the timeline for the weather normalization, that would be expected to be completed in time for you to incorporate it in the CPCN.
Yes, that would be expected to be completed in time for that, and that weather
Simplify
normalization.
a litigated issue.
Yeah, and none of those PIMs for the operational PIM for those projects obviously doesn't go into effect till after they're constructed. So for these projects, with some of them having 2028, 2029 in service dates, it's not that we would have some sort of adjustment that fundamentally changed what was in a bid package or something like that.
Okay, thanks. With regard to the discussion on interactive waking effects from extensive wind development in ERZ2 from the MTP report, is that in any way considered in the company's evaluation of operational PIMs? Like, would that have some influence or not?
Waking impacts, I don't know specifically how the bidder, any bidder, whether it's a third-party bidder, a self-build, how they are incorporating that in there. There's not a specific adjuster within the operational PIM that says, okay, we're going to calculate what blocking is or waking is and adjust for that impact. So I'm not sure there's a very straightforward answer. It may depend in part on a bid-by-bid basis. Did a bidder take that into account? Did a bidder not take that into account? Could they have taken it into account? One of the things I think we've started to notice with the kind of waking effect is if you have multiple projects that get approved in one portfolio, a bidder can't know that their project and the neighboring project are both going to get approved. So how do they really account for that? I think it's a long-term question with respect to the operational PIM that we need to be talking about and thinking about, but haven't as of yet come up with a firm conclusion on it. Does that?
And then as it's structured now, to my understanding, the operational PIM does not account for higher than forecasted curtailments. And so just curious if that's your general vision moving forward, and are there any other kind of natural consequences to the company if there are higher than forecasted curtailments within NTP projects?
So right now the operational PIM doesn't, I'll say, penalize or reward in any way the company for curtailments like a PPA. The curtailment costs or the curtailment megawatt hours are essentially added back in using the same methodology that we use in a PPA reconciliation for the company. That keeps all the wind projects from a power operations perspective on a level playing field. when you're looking at making curtailment decisions, which we want to make on the most economic basis. And so that curtailment process is kind of set in place in the PIM. As far as going forward goes, all the curtailments, I'm sure as you know, are a cost that would be evaluated and reviewed in the ECA, and nothing in the PIM proceedings had precluded a party from taking any position on the company's choices or decisions around curtailment. So all the parties still retain their rights to argue the company didn't curtail appropriately or something like that in a future cost recovery proceeding.
Okay, thanks. Now, question on the stage 2 relief that's brought up, I think in the NTP motion. So projects selected through the NTP, this is quoting, I think, the joint motion to initiate the NTP. So that projects selected through the NTP may be eligible for future 2021 ERP CEP Component 1 Stage 2 relief up to a 15% price change based on the same parameters previously approved by the Commission. Such projects would be eligible based only on tariffs or other federal actions occurring after their bid date, and any effects of tariffs enacted to date would need to be incorporated in the bid pricing already. And then selected projects would not be eligible for any additional relief due to supply chain and other complications. So curious, what's the rationale for including that? Like, understandably, and when we were doing the 2021 ERP CEP, in the very late stages of that, we already had bids in, everything was already baked. There was a consequential presidential election and policy shifted significantly. We kind of are where we are now. So I'm curious, are we really in a fundamentally similar position with regard to the need to adjust bids?
Yeah, hard to say one way or the other, and I certainly don't want to start turning this into a political platform. I will say that there's still some level of uncertainty from the federal government, and to be honest, that it feels like some of the rules and guidelines are continuing to be fluid. We're not contemplating anything. There's nothing on the horizon that we think is specifically focused, or this is specifically focused on. But there is some nervousness in the development community of just basically how the regulatory environment is working at a federal level now. Rather than having bidders essentially price that risk into their bids and customers bearing that, and we actually heard from our IPP counterparties as well that it was more effective to be able to have this relief mechanism in case something happens that we're not expecting, rather than having to price some level of that uncertainty into your bid price.
Okay. Thanks. And then I just want to understand too how you would envision this particular process working, especially with this expedited plan we're under here. I think in the earlier stages of the same proceeding, when this was implemented, the independent party was like reviewing this. Is that what you anticipate happening? So yeah, just trying to understand how you see that process actually playing out, especially given our expedited timeframe here.
Yeah, we expect it to play out the exact same way. We're going to retain the independent auditor that we're already utilizing, if necessary, to extend the engagement. And they'll follow the same processes in place with the same reporting obligations to the commission and the same final adjudication authority of the commission for determining that price relief. So, being realistic, I think your intuition is correct. This is going to be fast paced and not 100% sure how applicable it might end up being. But it is a safety net for the bidding community to have a little bit more surety that if something does dramatically change, there's a process in place to handle it.
Okay. And then you've kind of set a beginning date for this evaluation as the date of the bids. You knew what the tariffs were, you knew what things looked like. Is there an end date? Like, is there a time by which like we're done measuring and that's when you can evaluate, or can a bidder come back years later and say my costs went up through this process?
Yeah, Mike, do you remember the particulars of our filing?
Yeah, as it was currently structured, parties had up to, or bidders had up to 18 months prior to COD to make their submissions to the IA, and then the IA would review them and follow the process from there. Bidders could seek relief from that by, I think, directly requesting the commission provide them because of some circumstance that prevents them from providing the information to the IA. But the way CEPD was laid out was that bidders had they had to submit 18 months prior to their COD.
Okay. And is the company's assumption that any cost increase for the stage 2 relief should also alter a PIM baseline for utility-owned generation?
As of right now, the way that PIM baselines have worked is exclusive of the component 1 stage 2 relief, that IA relief. We have set the cost to construct baseline based upon the information that was known at that time, and it doesn't adjust for future IA process, I'll say.
Okay. And then just a question on the directionality of this stage 2 relief potential. Since we currently have, I would say, pretty historically high tariff situation, especially for certain geographic regions at this point in time, how would the adjustments to price work if these conditions actually ease in the future rather than worsen from a price perspective?
That is a very good question, and one I think was addressed in the CEPD decision, and I was attempting to pull it up. I was anticipating you may ask that, and I was attempting to pull it up to double check how exactly it worked, because I couldn't recall if it was component 1, stage 1, component 1, if you accepted that relief, then you were subject to the bidirectionality. There was some, I had some uncertainty in my memory there, so I was looking it up. It may be something, if you can give me a couple minutes, I can keep looking for if you have other questions, or somebody in our team maybe can look at if I have questions.
Yeah, they're mostly PIM based, but if someone wants to work on that in the background, great. The joint motion to initiate the NTP stated that the process must hold bidders accountable for tax credit qualification with no presumption of prudence applying to costs above the total as bid cost that includes tax benefits. And I was curious how the company plans to implement this provision, and does this include concerns the company raised in the NTP report regarding changing regulations related to the foreign entities of concern?
Yeah, I can start there. I think the way that we hold bidders accountable or maintain the risk at the bidder level is through the price certainty. That on an IPP project, we're barring the stage 2 relief, which we're just talking about for tariffs, we're not allowing for them to increase the price. So unless the tax code changes, if it's something that they thought they were going to get an energy community bonus, then they don't, or they thought they were going to have domestic content and now they don't, or they can't meet their COD, or their safe harbor was rejected by the IRS. All of those are bidder risk issues. And the bidder, if they're able to complete the project at the bid cost, which would be highly unlikely, but they're given the opportunity to do so, then no problem. But they're certainly not going to be able to say, well, I need a 30% price increase because I lost my tax credit eligibility. So in that case, the project would most likely fail in most likely situations. For the case of the company, we have the PIMs in place, which is the cost to construct, which includes the ITC, or the operational PIM, which includes the PTC, and we're agreeing to be held by those existing constructs that also don't have provisions in them for not getting certain bonuses or failing eligibility tests for the tax credits. So at a high level, that's how we're doing it, is by having this be a fixed price solicitation where bidders are expected to maintain that price regardless of circumstances with the carve out of the stage 2 price relief that we've already discussed.
Mr. Piscucci?
Sorry, I was not seeking to add on to Mr. Landrum there, but I did have an answer to your previous question about how tariff relief worked, and was just noting that I had that before we got too far down the road.
Okay. Okay, ideal. If it works for you all, and sorry to do this to you, Chair, but maybe you can get to Mr. Larson's question to you. I need to take just 1 minute myself, and then I'll come back and finish my questioning and can get that response from you, Mr. Piscucci. But I know the chair had that to do, so I just needed a brief minute, and ideally that'll be a good use of time.
Mr. Larson?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Gilman. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to confirm the bid numbers that you and I spoke about yesterday in the potential alternate hypothetical portfolio that we spoke about.
Yeah, so just given the transmission costs, curtailment, locational value, optimal resource mix, and PPA concerns we discussed yesterday, the proposal was to move forward with bid 99, 114 or 113, 53, 54, 35, and 135. I'm sorry, 54, 34, and 135. And the thought was to take any bid that had a capacity value in the Denver metro area or come online before the end of 2028 and leave most of the rest to the forthcoming JTS process when there's better answers to these concerns, and assuming that we can safe harbor projects for the JTS. At the same time, I'd just say there's a very broad middle ground. No decisions are getting made this month, and there may be better ways of structuring tier 1 and 2. So I just view this as a proposal for discussion. So
Yeah.
did that make sense, Mr. Larson?
It does. And just for clarity, so 94 was the one that we had confusion on. We thought maybe 94 had gotten pulled up potentially in that scenario from being a tier 2 to a tier 1.
I did not. I don't think I meant that, and apologize if there's confusion. Oh, is that in the Denver? I didn't realize until today that was clearly in the Denver metro area. So I don't have a view on that, but yeah, that would be consistent with that thinking.
Okay, thank you. And that was part of my question, just like taking the principles that we had a dialogue about yesterday, and 94 was primarily the area in which we were confused. Everything else matches up with the notes that we had. Yeah,
and just one question on that. I think there was testimony that was in the Denver metro area, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
The point of interconnection, which is really the driving factor from an electrical basis, is clearly inside the Denver metro area.
And the high side of the voltage on that is 233. I was thinking maybe the high side was outside the Denver metro area and the low side was in, but the high side is not 345, it's 230.
Yeah, that particular location isn't really on the ring fence, if you will, where that high-low side makes a big distinction. The entire substation is relatively good.
Okay.
Great.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for running back through that. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Okay, thanks everyone. Sorry to zig and zag, but I needed a quick minute and I knew that had to get done. Okay, Mr. Piscucci, yeah, your response to the bi-directionality potential of phase 2 relief.
Yes, it was in paragraph 77 of, let's see, decision C250024, which was I'll call the CEPD decision. That paragraph 77 does say, consistent with our discussion above, we emphasize that the stage 2 process is bi-directional for any projects that received stage 1 price relief. So I think in this case, where there is no stage 1 price relief, bidders were expected to bid the current market conditions into their bids. There's not a presumption of bi-directionality to it, since we're kind of porting over the same process that already exists.
Okay. Okay. Let's see. And then I know you've been having discussions about this with the chair and others, but the NTP report states that approval of the NTP portfolio represents the best and likely last opportunity to acquire tax advantage clean energy generation. And I just wanted to better understand. I know there's been a lot of discussion about it already, but how confident the company is that none of the bids arising from the JTS base RFP would likely already be eligible for tax credits.
I would say not none. Low confidence that the answer is none. I think there likely could be some. The most likely candidates for being able to offer tax advantage generation, absent some sort of a carryover of these bids, like we've been discussing with the chairman, is going to be larger developers that have at least national, if not international, footprints of operation, that have purchased equipment on a portfolio basis that they're looking to allocate to selected projects over the next few years. There will be some of those. I think there will be significantly less than we would have expected before. I think many smaller bidders will not have that opportunity or have the balance sheets to support that kind of a strategy. But to put a number on, 5%, 10%, half, very unknown. My expectations is it would be limited. There would be some, but limited opportunities to capture those tax credits. I will say from a competitive basis, there's a chance that a bidder that has a tax advantage project has an opportunity to increase their margin while knowing that they're still going to be cheaper than guys that don't have tax credits. So I'm not trying to predict the market, but there is a tendency there where we could see even tax credited projects be bid at higher levels simply because they can. So how that plays out is anybody's guess, but that's just my insight and intuition.
Okay, got it. And I know the chair's brought up some concepts for ensuring bids could be available, but curious from the company's perspective, if there are any other actions the commission could take that would increase the likelihood of projects being tax eligible, even if they don't receive final approval in this first round.
I don't think I have anything to offer that we haven't already discussed or put forward. I don't know if anyone else on the team has anything to contribute, but
Just want to make sure we got all the ideas.
yeah,
The only other idea I think I could maybe note that I'm not sure we've talked at all about, and I'm not sure if it was just implicitly implied in the approval of a portfolio or any of the structures or not, but the presumption of prudence and finding of needs, I think, become important because however this portfolio gets approved and set, I think the challenge could come in if there's no finding of need and presumption of prudence associated with any of the projects. In a typical resource plan solicitation, a portfolio is granted that presumption of prudence and finding of need. I think lack of that could create uncertainties that could cause additional follow-on filings or additional litigation to be necessary to understand what the risks are there. So that's the only other thing that I think helps create certainty for bidders and the company in their interactions, is knowing that the commission has said, look, this is the portfolio we want. This is the process we want to follow. These projects are needed. There is a presumption of prudence behind them, gives the company the ability to engage in negotiations. And I think simultaneously gives bidders a confidence to know I'm negotiating with the company who has authorization to execute this contract with me. Not that the company is executing a contract, but might have to come back to me and say, well, 18 months later, the commission changed their mind. They don't want to take this contract anymore. So only other thing I think I'd note there, Commissioner Gilman.
Okay, thanks. Just really one last question, I think, for me. The NTP report states cost recovery for dispatchable projects would commence upon each project's COD through the PCCA. And I believe this is a concept from a settlement agreement in a separate proceeding. I just want to make sure that was the the basis that the company was using for that suggestion?
So the suggestion, I think, is a combination of factors. There have been several projects approved in the past for which there was that cost recovery that commenced at the time. It was also what was agreed to in the settlement in the PIM proceeding, as you know, where bid 1000, the Fort St. Vrain 7 and 8 project that's currently in a pending CPCN, because it was tied to the availability PIM, it was also tied to the accelerated cost recovery. So there's a lengthy history of certain projects, of other thermal projects receiving that treatment, and it was addressed in that PIM proceeding.
Got it. I think those are my only questions. So, wanted to see if there's anything else we need to attend to today.
Nothing else from the company's end, Commissioner.
Nothing, Chairman, anything from you? Oh, Ms. McLaughlin?
I don't have anything to attend to, but I just wanted to make some clarifications and maybe some expectations, but I can go whenever you're ready, Commissioner.
About their expectation. Go for it.
Go now, Ms.
Okay.
McLaughlin.
Thank you, guys. I was just going to say that I think that Commissioner Gilman, based on your rulings today, that we can expect that parties will attach appropriate, whether those are highly confidential or just demonstrative attachments to their comments in January. I also was going to ask if the commissioners wanted to put a finer point on an expectation for that technical conference version of the highly confidential attached Appendix A that the company is going to provide. I think it'd be helpful to have that no later than early next week, if that's possible for the company. And then I also just wanted to note that I really appreciate all of the work that's been going on behind the scenes, including from our court reporter. I know that there have been transcripts that have already been requested, and given the press of other business and holidays, I just wanted to let folks know that the expectation is that she would have those by January 6th, but that obviously we've got this recording, so folks can use that in the meantime while they're getting ready for their comment filings in January. Those are my three points to your attention, commissioners.
Thank you. It's my understanding the party comments are due January 12th, 2026. Any comments or issues before we conclude today?
Yeah, I just have a final comment. I just wanted to say, appreciate the company's transparencies about the concerns and struggles we're confronting. I mean, we're trying to allocate, somewhere between 10 and $15 billion, maybe more, on a very short time frame with significant uncertainty, and nothing's perfect, but just appreciate your transparency here. It helps build trust as we struggle with these challenges. So that's my final comment. Commissioner Gilman.
Commissioner Plant, anything?
No, nothing further. Thanks a lot, everybody.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for your participation today. That'll conclude our technical conference, and really hope everybody enjoys their holidays and gets to spend some time with family and friends. So we'll see y'all soon. Thanks.
Likewise. Thank you.
You.